Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In this video, my HOA neighbor constantly called the police on me for having barbecues in my garden. She claimed I am violating both the law and the HOA bylaws. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled, "Am I the a-hole for building a temporary 40-foot structure to spite my HOA?" I, 35 male, have always had a weird hobby. I love reading contracts, bylaws and legal agreements. My wife thinks I'm strange, but I find it fascinating how people try to write rules to control every possible situation, and I enjoy finding the loopholes they inevitably miss. This hobby recently came in handy when my best friend Scott got into trouble with his HOA. It started when Scott called me one evening, clearly upset. "Dave, these HOA people are driving me insane," he vented. "They are threatening to fine me $500 a month because I keep my fishing boat behind my house. Can you believe this?" I could hear the frustration in his voice. Scott had bought his dream home 6 months ago, and the HOA had been a constant thorn in his side. "Send me the HOA agreement," I told him. "Let me take a look." That night, I dove into the documents like a kid with a new video game. The more I read, the more interesting it got. You see, HOAs typically have strong enforcement powers for anything visible from the street or common areas, since their primary purpose is maintaining property values. But their authority gets murky when it comes to things they cannot see. I spent the next week researching similar cases and found several court rulings that specifically addressed this issue. One judge had written that HOA enforcement powers must be reasonably related to their purpose of maintaining community aesthetics and property values. Another ruling stated that items not visible from common areas generally fall outside the scope of HOA authority unless specifically addressed in the founding documents. Armed with this information, I called Scott. "Listen, I think we've got something here. The boat is completely hidden behind your house. You cannot see it from the street or any other common areas. Their own agreement does not even specifically address items in backyard spaces, only visible structures and vehicles." Scott was skeptical. He said, "Do you really think that matters? These people are relentless." "Trust me," I said. "Document everything. Take photos showing how the boat is not visible from any public space. Write a formal letter citing these court cases and requesting that they show where in the agreement they have authority over non-visible items." And well, Scott followed my advice, but the HOA brushed him off with a dismissive email. "The agreement clearly states that all exterior modifications and vehicle storage must be approved by the board. Your continued non-compliance will result in escalating fines." "They are just trying to intimidate you," I told Scott. "They are hoping that you'll back down without a fight." But they know their position is weak. After 3 months of back and forth and mounting fines, Scott finally hired a real estate lawyer. It cost him $2,000, but it was worth every penny. The lawyer systematically dismantled their arguments in a series of meetings, pointing out the limits of their authority and the potential liability they faced for overstepping. And then finally, the HOA backed down, removed all the fines and acknowledged in writing that items not visible from common areas were outside their jurisdiction. That is when I had an idea, a deliciously petty idea. I said, "Hey Scott, remember how they tried to bully you about the boat? What if we gave them something they actually could see? Something completely legal but absolutely hideous." Scott's eyes lit up. "What did you have in mind?" I showed him my plans for what I called a temporary recreational structure. The HOA agreement allowed temporary structures for up to 90 days, after which they had to be taken down. But nothing prevented you from putting them right back up again. They also allowed flagpoles up to 25 feet tall for patriotic display. We spent the next month carefully designing and building it. The main structure was 40 feet tall, made of bright purple metal scaffolding that we got surplus from a construction company. At the top we installed a 25-foot flagpole, making the total height 65 feet. We painted the whole thing in alternating neon green and orange stripes, colors specifically not restricted by the HOA agreement. The day we finished it, Scott's next-door neighbor Martha, who was on the HOA board, came running out of her house. "What in God's name is that monstrosity?" "It's my new temporary recreational structure," Scott said innocently, "for flying flags, totally compliant with section 732 of the HOA agreement." "This is totally unacceptable," she sputtered. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting." The meeting was held 2 days later. The boardroom was packed with angry homeowners. The HOA president, a pompous man named Richard, glared at us as we entered. "Mr. Thompson," he addressed Scott, "this structure clearly violates community standards. It must come down immediately." I spoke up. "Actually, I have reviewed the agreement thoroughly and temporary structures are explicitly permitted for up to 90 days. There are no height restrictions except for the flagpole, which is within limits. The colors are not restricted, everything about it is completely compliant." But it's an eyesore," Richard spluttered. "Aesthetic judgments are not part of the agreement," I replied calmly, "unless you can point to a maybe specific violation." But they couldn't, of course. We'd made sure of that. The structure stayed up for exactly 89 days, then we took it down and put it right back up the next day. We did this 4 times over the course of a year. You could see it from almost anywhere in the neighborhood. The flag would make a distinctive flapping sound in the wind that drove Richard crazy, and best of all, it was completely, totally legal according to their own rules. The HOA tried everything to stop us. They passed new rules about structure height and color restrictions, but those could not be applied retroactively. They threatened to sue us, but their own lawyer advised against it. They begged us to take it down, offering to waive various fees and restrictions. Finally, after a year of this, they called a community meeting and formally amended the HOA agreement to significantly limit their authority over backyard spaces and items not visible from common areas. Exactly what we had wanted in the first place. Only then did we permanently remove our creation. The structure cost us about $3,000 in materials and countless hours to repeatedly assemble and disassemble. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it worth it to see Richard's face turn purple every time he drove past? Absolutely. But now I'm wondering, am I the a-hole here for helping my friend fight back against HOA overreach in such a spiteful way? To be clear, we technically followed all their rules, but we deliberately made the structure as annoying as possible to prove a point. And yeah guys, let me know what you think about this in the comments. Do you think OP was the a-hole here, or did he enact an absolutely brilliant case of petty revenge? A user in the comments said, "Not the a-hole at all. HOAs are notorious for overstepping their bounds and bullying homeowners. You found a creative way to fight back using their own rules against them. This is beautiful, malicious compliance." Comment number 2, "You are the a-hole. You deliberately created an eyesore that affected everyone in the neighborhood, not just the HOA board. People's home values probably dropped because of your childish stunt. There are proper ways to handle disputes, but this was not one of them." Comment number 3, "You are the a-hole. Congratulations. You found a loophole, but instead of trying to work things out like an adult, you spent a year harassing your entire neighborhood. How much time and money did you waste just to be petty? This is peak man-child behavior." And yeah guys, I'm curious if you agree with this comment or not. Let me know in the comments. The next one is titled, "HOA neighbor keeps calling police on me for a barbecue in my garden." So my name is Steven and my wife Linda and I live in a beautiful neighborhood and love to have barbecues in our garden. We invested in a high-quality barbecue setup and take pride in our outdoor cooking. I generally look after all the grilling when it comes to our barbecuing, and Linda ensures we have a number of delicious side dishes and baked goods to go along with what I cook. Both Linda and I are adventurous and love to research and try new recipes too. If this part of our lives was taken away from us, we would be devastated. We both have good jobs and work hard and take our entertaining time seriously because it is something we genuinely enjoy. Once in a while we will have a barbecue just for us, but since we have such a big setup, most of the time we wait to have a small crowd to feed. We've lived in our home for a while and haven't had any difficulties doing what we love. However, recently a new family moved into the neighborhood. We live in a gated community with a homeowners association. The woman, Karen, is overzealous when it comes to the rules. Her personality is far from pleasant. I think perhaps she needs friends or a hobby because she is always complaining about something, including when the garbage bins are sometimes not placed correctly. And wait guys, I thought being an HOA dictator is a valid hobby. Maybe I misunderstood something. Just kidding here, of course. And often when that happens, it is because we've had some weather that might move them or knock them over. Recently, I was hosting a barbecue with Linda when Karen came by. We had about a dozen people over and things were going well. It was a Saturday afternoon and we were all following the necessary rules. Our HOA does permit barbecues as long as we meet a number of conditions, which we always make sure we do. We need to ensure that the barbecues take place a certain number of feet away from the property lines and that they don't get too loud and that they only happen during certain hours of the day. Before we invested in our high-quality barbecue setup, Linda and I made sure that what we wanted to do would be compliant. Anyways though, during the barbecue, Karen came over to our house. She stood with her hands on her hips and said, "Your barbecue is making too much smoke. I demand that you stop this at once." "Well, I'm sorry if the smoke is bothering you," I replied, "but I'm following the regulations here. I will finish cooking as quickly as possible though, so it doesn't disturb you." "I want you to stop this barbecue immediately," demanded Karen. "If you don't, I'm gonna call the police." "Please, Karen," said Linda, coming over, "we don't want any trouble. How about you come on in the house with me and I will get you a piece of cake or a pie and make you a cup of tea. You can meet a few people in the neighborhood at the same time and the smoke should have decreased significantly by the time we finish." "Are you trying to bribe me with your food?" asked Karen. "No," replied Linda. "I'm just trying to be a good neighbor. And you are new to the neighborhood and my husband and I want to be as helpful as we can. Linda and Steven are excellent cooks," chimed in another one of our neighbors named Sharon. "You'll enjoy joining us in the house for some dessert and tea. They have the best variety tea that I've ever seen too. Our family in the United States gifts it to us for special occasions," replied Linda. "You're just trying to get me to forget about the smoke," said Karen. "It's not gonna work." Karen got angrier and began yelling and screaming about the smoke. Then she pulled out her phone and called the police. I was horrified by what was happening and I could tell that Linda was too. She and Sharon had tried to make Karen feel welcome and it hadn't worked. I wondered if there was anything that could please Karen. It seemed like she just liked causing problems. A short time after, the police arrived. "I'm looking for Karen," said Officer White. I recognized him from the neighborhood. He also lived there. "I'm Karen," she said, stepping forward. "I want this man arrested. His barbecue is making too much smoke." "We don't usually arrest people for that type of infraction," said Officer White calmly. "Would you like to see my barbecue?" I asked. "I would," said Officer White's partner, Officer Bentley. Officer Bentley and I looked at my barbecue setup and I walked him through it. I mentioned the HOA's regulations. "Sorry ma'am," said Officer Bentley when we walked back over to Karen and Officer White. "Things are in compliance here. Steven can continue with his barbecue." "But that's outrageous," said Karen. "The smoke is aggravating my allergies." "We offered to let her come inside for a bit," said Linda, while the smoke dies down a bit, but she wasn't interested. "I don't want your cake or pie and tea regardless of how good you claim it is. And don't even offer me a burger either. I want nothing to do with it," said Karen. "How about heading on home now, ma'am?" said Officer White. "We can let these folks enjoy the rest of their gathering." "No," said Karen. "The smell of the barbecue is just offensive." "We will have it all eaten up in no time, or at least if there are leftovers, they'll be in the fridge," I said. "And he is laughing too loud," added Karen. "It disturbs the peace." At this point, the officers gave Karen a stern warning about making frivolous claims and walked her back to her home. The mood at our gathering was not the best after that, but we decided that we would do what we could to still enjoy ourselves. After all, we had the food and the friends to enjoy it with, and stopping it now would only satisfy Karen and her false claims. The few weeks following our barbecue were troubling ones. Karen decided that Linda and I were to be the target of her complaints and she called the HOA on us over a dozen times. After the first couple times, I began to keep track of every single complaint, including the passive-aggressive notes that she left on our door or in our mailbox and the voicemail messages that she left us as well. We also got a number of visits from members of the HOA as they needed to investigate each of her complaints. We began to spend more time outside our home, often eating at restaurants for supper instead of cooking at home, even in our own kitchen, because we were wrought by the stress of everything that was happening here and wanted to be as far away from Karen as possible. She even complained when our outdoor light came on one evening and we were not home. She said it shone too brightly in our yard. The cause of the light coming on, as it is motion sensor initiated, was a stray cat. My security camera picked it up. I had one installed after Karen began making complaints so that I could have my own proof of what was happening concerning her harassment. One evening while we were having supper at a restaurant, Linda and I decided that we needed to take back control of our lives. Karen was preventing us from enjoying ourselves and was even disturbing our sleep as we kept wondering what would be next. We decided that we needed to take action. It wasn't right that we were no longer happy in our own home or yard. "This chicken sandwich is alright," said Linda sadly, "but I would much rather have had your barbecue chicken with a side of barbecued baked potatoes with all the fixings. I would not mind having one of your chocolate cakes right now either," I said. "We're not gonna stand for what Karen is doing to us anymore. Going out to the restaurant is nice every now and then. It gives us different recipe ideas and a chance to have a change of scenery, but honestly, we should get to decide when we want to be home and when we want a night out on the town." "Even if we do something, what's to stop her though?" asked Linda. "I cannot understand why she doesn't commit more time to her family and less to causing all these problems." I wish I had the answers, I said. And yeah guys, if someone can answer that question, they probably also have the answer to the universe and to the meaning of life. Anyway, I promise you, Linda, that we're gonna figure things out. We will find a way to get our lives back. We'll get to cook and enjoy entertaining and our time alone again. I hope so, said Linda, because I've come to dread each day, wondering what else Karen's gonna throw at us and who will be at our door next. I used to enjoy the knocks because it might be a neighbor coming by to have tea and a chat. But now they've taken to avoiding us, I suppose because some of them believe her and others are just afraid that they'll be next on her list if they associate with us. When we got home, I compiled everything that I had and went to the homeowner association's board with Linda. We presented them with our evidence demonstrating the pattern of harassment and false accusations. Some of our own neighbors had started to wonder if what Karen was saying was true about us because she was so vocal. We are sorry this has been happening, said the president of the Homeowners Association. We have warned Karen about some of her complaints, but with your official complaint, we will expedite the letters of warning and measures that we were thinking about taking anyway. They ended up writing her a formal warning and issuing her a fine for $300. They also mandated that if things further escalated with her, not just with Linda and I, but in general, with any of the other homeowners, that there would be more severe consequences, including larger fines and even the possibility of being kicked out of the association should her behavior not improve. I'm glad that's over, said Linda as we headed back to our house and began to plan a barbecue. We wanted to spend time with our friends and neighbors again. We wanted to celebrate getting our lives back. We suspected that with the actions the HOA was taking against Karen, that she would not be a problem to us or anyone anymore. You humiliated me, said Karen the next time that we met her on the street. We are sorry, I replied, but you were making our life beyond difficult. We never wanted to be anything but good neighbors. You violated that opportunity because instead of trying to get to know us, you complained about everything. And we were not doing anything wrong. But to complain about me, said Karen, how dare you? We are done talking about this, I replied and headed back to my home. Karen ended up backing down as the whole neighborhood was aware of the Homeowners Association's board decision and that Karen's behavior would not be tolerated anymore. Neighbors who had become wary of us because of the number of times they had seen police and the HOA at our door apologized to us and we resumed life in the neighborhood. Our barbecue was huge and even included the police officers who had initially responded to Karen's complaint about there being too much smoke. They were after all members of our neighborhood. This time our yard was filled with people and some even brought side dishes and desserts of their own to help fill up our tables. We were glad to have our lives back and to be able to continue with the barbecues that we enjoyed, whether they be just Linda and I, a small gathering, or the whole neighborhood. And yeah guys, I actually found this story really interesting because it's one of the few instances where an HOA actually helped a homeowner and it is kind of a feel-good story. Especially in this sea of negative HOA stories, I think it's good to have a story like this every now and then. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So every 4th of July my family goes to a park where we are allowed to have some food, listen to music being played over speakers and watch the fireworks. It's a pretty large park and there's a park actually down the road that's a memorial area for veterans, so feeling that is nice for some people, myself included. This one year I went was a little different because it was the first year that I was able to go in uniform as I was currently in the army. And well, what I didn't know until the day was that being an active service member meant that I was able to get some extra things from the people running the event. Not much, but for one, there was a separate area just for military and families, and I thought that was great since finding a spot is the hardest thing of all. I'm an active person though, so I walked all around and chatted with random people as well as some I knew from the neighborhood. Everything seemed normal until I was approached by a woman that had already drank more than enough beer despite it not even being sunset yet. Just keep in mind through this story that I was in uniform, so I couldn't just say or do whatever I wanted. I had to act a certain way, no matter how rude a person she was. Karen, hey you. Me, yes ma'am? Karen, when are they gonna start the fireworks? My kids are getting bitten by mosquitoes and are bored. Me, ma'am, they usually start about half an hour after the sun sets. Karen, that's not acceptable. I wanna speak to whoever is above you if you won't help me. You clearly have no idea how to run an event. Plus dressing up in that silly costume when you're a grown man. That's pathetic. She figured that I was with the group running the event, despite them all being in matching shirts. And figured that I was not actually in the army and just dressing up for no reason. I ignored the letter and just focused on the main issue. Me, ma'am, I'm not with the event organization. Those members are all wearing black shirts with the town name on it. Again, I'm speaking very respectfully, despite wanting to just blow her off and walk away. If she did not turn and start going towards one of them, I don't know how long I would have been stuck with her. As soon as I was away, I went back to my family in the reserved area. I did not think that I was gonna see Karen again, but about 15 minutes later, she came with one of the actual staff members to complain about me. Karen, there he is. He refused to help me, and now he's hanging out with other people in costumes being disrespectful. Some people died for this country and holiday, and all they are doing is mocking it by showing up like that. Make them take it off and share the space with other people. We are all smushed together trying to get a good spot while they actually stole this one. The worker tried to explain that we were actual soldiers and had the area reserved for us out of respect. That I had no influence on the event and had no power to help her. None of this was going over well with the drunk Karen, who was trying to push her kids to crawl under the rope into our area while she climbed over it. I had zero clue what to do, as I had not been in the military very long and had no power in the rank. Most of the other guys were in similar situations, but there were a couple of officers that noticed the commotion and came over. They had been somewhere else, and I did not even know that they had come. I guess they wanted us to feel relaxed by not having them over us and feeling watched the entire time. Anyway, they were asking about the problems, and of course drunk Karen started screaming about us being horrible and wanting to abuse her kids. All the crap and more, as the beer seemed to lubricate her mouth to the point that she wouldn't stop talking. Meanwhile, I was crapping my pants because if he believed any of what she said, I was gonna be in a ton of trouble. One assured me that I was not in any trouble, and this was not the first time things like this happened. People would get drunk at these things and pick on anybody in uniform because they are just a-holes. The only thing they could do was try and make Karen go away and hope that she just moved on since she didn't do anything actually illegal. That lasted for about 15 seconds before Karen decided it was the greatest idea in the world to run up and slap me across the face before calling me a pervert. I don't know where she got that from, right in front of all the witnesses. If you've ever been to a fireworks display, you know that there's no shortage of police and fire brigade just for safety. That meant between slapping me and getting herself read her rights, there was only about 2 minutes to process the entire thing. I wished in just that moment I was not in uniform and could act how I wanted, because all I wanted to do was scream at her and tell her off for being the worst person in the world. I couldn't do that, sadly, but there was nothing stopping my civilian brother from doing it. I just want to paint a mental picture for you because I think it's beautiful and hilarious. So now Karen is being handcuffed by police while trying to argue that the entire thing was my fault, and then you have a 12-year-old boy telling her off for misbehaving and yelling at her for hitting a soldier. Before, of course, spitting at her and being silently cheered on by half a dozen service members. Karen was then arrested for assault and harassment, and the last thing I heard from her before she was too far away was that she had the right as an American to watch the fireworks before she was arrested. Because of course that was what we fought wars for, her right to slap a soldier and watch fireworks. The rest of the night went more as I expected it to, and I did not let her ruin the entire event for me. I found out more a few days later when I had to give a formal statement to police. Not only was she drunk, but when they searched her, they found hardcore drugs. Not just a little bit either, so she might have been trying to sell some at the park as well. I also asked about her kids because I didn't know if they were there with somebody else. They could only tell me that other family was there and the children are deemed safe in their care. Karen was going to prison, no question. She might have not if she had nothing on her, but heavy drugs with intent to sell pretty much means that you are doing time. Update to the story: for those in the comments questioning about the alcohol being illegal, it was not. The event was selling the beers she had been drinking. Most people were having beer, just not getting as drunk as she was, which might also be due to the drug use. And the next one is a petty revenge story. My aunt's husband is a total dickhead. For some background, my mother's family is Guyanese and mixed with Scottish, German and Amerindian, but mainly looking black. My mother married a white Irish man, my dad, and I came out looking super duper pale with blue eyes and blonde hair. My brothers are both much darker because being biracial means getting a grab bag of genes. My aunt, my mother's sister, married a Nigerian immigrant who is lazy and racist. He came over for a PhD course, which he only passed because my aunt wrote his thesis and in the 30 years since has refused to work, and his distaste at being married into the same family as a white guy has manifested in a number of ways, from telling others that my dad has shouted racial abuse at him, witnesses confirmed he absolutely did not, to even refusing to speak to me because of my skin color. A few years ago, he was shouting about something completely false, and when I told him that he was wrong, he tried to physically attack me for being disrespectful and had to be held back by my dad and uncles. He was in his 50s and I was a 16-year-old girl. I later heard from my grandfather that after he yelled at my aunt's husband, aunt's husband, said that if he faced any consequences like being banned from family dinners or told off again for his treatment of me, he would take my cousins, leave my aunt and go back to Nigeria. It's been a few years since then, I'm an adult now and I've steered clear of as many holidays as possible. I did not want my grandfather to have to choose between protecting me and seeing my cousins again. My grandfather made it clear that he was on my side and would have physically removed the a-hole from his home, but of course that would result in probably never seeing my cousins again. I did not want him to make that choice. My grandfather died this year, it was a pretty awful illness, and I spent most of my time out of work inside of the hospital with him. My dad was there too, his father-in-law was the closest he had to a father. My grandfather taught me many great things, including that you should not allow people to ruin things for you, things like family gatherings. Now, the thing about this dude is, on top of being lazy as hell, he is super entitled. He fully believes that he is the head of the family, despite everyone hating him and ignoring him. He believes he is owed deference and respect from all. He told my aunt that since I didn't show him respect, she and my cousins were no longer buying me Christmas presents. I have not received a single one from them in years, by the way. So I set my plan into motion. I don't get paid out a lot, but I saved from October onwards. I filled the tree in my grandfather's old house with presents, one for every person in my family, bar one. This morning, Christmas Day, I stood under the tree with my gifts in my arms and I gave every person there a present that I had spent hours picking out. I went up to each individual, passing him several times while he looked at the gifts greedily and handed everyone something they would have wanted. I got to drink in the look of guilt on the faces of my cousins and my aunt as I received one solitary present from my mother's brother as they received a bunch from me. It was delicious. Finally, there was one gift left under the tree, a single envelope. It said, "For all your help looking after grandfather." I handed it to him. Inside were return Eurostar tickets to Paris for a long weekend. "Oh," I said, "I've made a mistake. That is my extra present to Dad." And indeed, there was my father's name on the tickets. He got to see every wonderful gift I got everyone else, while he received nothing. Nothing from me, nothing from my brothers who hate how he treats me, nothing from my uncles who hate him and only ever gave him things because my grandfather wanted to keep the peace to continue seeing his grandkids. The cherry on top, I received a special gift from my friend today. He bought 2 square feet of land for me and an aristocratic title. I'm now a lady, and even though it barely means anything, my family has been pretend bowing and scraping to me while ignoring him and his demands for respect, and he is now sulking and refusing to speak to anyone. Merry Christmas, Tony. And before we end the video, I will read one last brand new story from r/PattyRevenge that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "Family taking up all the space refuses to let anyone else in." So my boyfriend just got home from the supermarket and I've got a Patty Revenge story for you. So before he went to the supermarket to grab a few things, my boyfriend asked if there was anything that I would like. I was craving some croissants, so that's what I asked for. Boyfriend got to the meat aisle and found that not only was there a big family taking up the whole section he wanted to get to, but there was already someone else waiting too. "Excuse me" was wasted and they seemed to be moving slower and slower. After waiting for longer than necessary, he decided to get the other things he came for. When my boyfriend got back, they were still there, so he waited a little longer and of course politely let the other person who was still there go first. Then he only had my croissants to get. There was not any left in the bread section, but he knew they sometimes had a rack of them at the front. As he got there, he saw the family still spreading out, taking up a large section of the aisle, blocking anyone from getting past. So he went around the other way. As he got to the shelf, they took the last bag of croissants. Frustrated and not wanting to go the long way, he squeezed past, snagging the croissants as he walked by and to the checkout. Normally I would not agree with the trolley snatching breach of supermarket etiquette, but I think in this case he was justified. And yeah guys, thanks for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.